That would catch someone quietly moving through your systems in real time. That's expensive, it's unglamorous, and it doesn't show up on a pitch deck slide about growth metrics. So what happens is this. A company grows. It adds more integrations, more third-party tools, more employees with access to more systems. Every one of those additions is a small, reasonable business decision made in isolation. Nobody sits in a meeting and says, let's make our attack surface massive and impossible to fully monitor. It happens gradually, decision by decision, tool by tool, permission by permission, until one day the company has an enormous sprawling web of access points that nobody has a complete mental map of anymore, including the people who built it. Now imagine a hacker gets in through one of those access points. Maybe it's a stolen login. Maybe it's a vendor with weaker security that got compromised first. Maybe it's a support agent who got tricked by a message that looked internal. It genuinely doesn't matter which door they used, because the pattern after that point tends to look remarkably similar across almost every case like this. They don't immediately start causing chaos. That would be the fastest way to get caught. Instead, they sit quietly. They explore. They map out what they actually have access to, what data exists, what's valuable, what's easy to move without triggering anything. This phase can last days. It can last weeks. In some of the cases that have made headlines recently, attackers maintained quiet access to company networks for over a month before anyone noticed anything was wrong. A month. Think about that. A full month of someone having a presence inside a company's systems, and during that entire time, everyone inside that company genuinely believed everything was fine, because from their perspective, nothing had changed. The dashboards looked normal. The systems responded the way they always did. There was no reason for anyone to suspect. I want to talk about the part of every hacking story that never makes it into the headline, because I genuinely think it's the scariest part, and almost nobody talks about it directly. It's not the moment the hacker gets in, it's not the ransom note. It's not even the moment the company finally finds out. It's the gap in between. The stretch of time where a company has already been breached, data is already being copied out the back door, and absolutely nobody inside the company has any idea it's happening. Not a single alert. Not a single suspicious email. Just business as usual. Meetings happening, deadlines being hit, someone complaining about the coffee machine, while somewhere in the background, a stranger is quietly walking through their entire customer database. This isn't a rare edge case. This is, statistically, closer to the normal experience of getting hacked. And I think most people, when they picture a breach, picture something dramatic and immediate. Alarms going off, IT racing to a computer, someone yelling, "We're under attack." That's the movie version. The real version is almost always quiet, slow, and honestly, kind of boring, right up until it isn't. Let's talk about why this happens, because I think understanding the mechanics here actually changes how you think about security if you're running any kind of SaaS product, or honestly, using any SaaS product at all. The first thing to understand is that most SaaS companies are simply not built, from day one, with the assumption that someone is actively trying to break in right now. They're built to solve a problem, ship features, acquire customers, and grow. Security, especially in the early stages, tends to exist as a checklist item rather than a living, breathing part of the culture. You get basic authentication, maybe some encryption, maybe a security page on the website that talks a big game about how seriously they take your data, but actual continuous monitoring, the kind of infrastructure, individual businesses one at a time, when they could instead spend that same effort breaching the one SaaS platform that all 1,000 of those businesses already trust with their data. Now let's talk about why the discovery gap specifically tends to be so wide in SaaS environments, because I think this is where a lot of the actual technical reality comes in, without getting too deep into jargon. Most SaaS platforms operate on the assumption that authenticated access is trusted access. Once someone logs in correctly, with a valid username and password, or through a legitimate-sounding internal request, the system generally treats that activity as normal, expected behavior. It doesn't necessarily flag someone quietly browsing through records they technically have permission to access, even if the way they're browsing, the volume, the pattern, the timing, looks nothing like how a real employee would normally use the system. This is the exact gap attackers exploit. They're not smashing down a locked door, they're walking through one that's technically open to them, because they've obtained credentials that make the system believe they belong there. And a system that believes you belong there generally isn't designed to interrogate you the same way it would interrogate an obvious outsider trying to force their way in. Building systems that can reliably distinguish between "this is a legitimate user doing legitimate things slightly differently than usual," and "this is an attacker using stolen credentials to systematically explore and exfiltrate data," is genuinely difficult, resource-intensive work. It requires constant tuning, constant monitoring, and a level of ongoing investment that a lot of growing SaaS companies simply haven't prioritized yet, because it doesn't visibly move the metrics that get celebrated in board meetings the way user growth or revenue numbers do. I think this is where I want to push back gently on the instinct to simply blame individual, designed to catch. I think there's an uncomfortable parallel here to how the human body handles certain illnesses. Some conditions announce themselves immediately, loudly, painfully, forcing you to seek help right away. Others are quiet for a long time, causing damage slowly and visibly, until the symptoms finally show up, often well after the underlying problem has already done significant harm. A slow, quiet SaaS breach is a lot closer to the second kind. By the time there's a visible symptom, whether that's stolen data showing up somewhere, or unusual account activity a customer flags, or a security researcher's late-night discovery, the actual damage has usually already been unfolding in the background for a while. I want to talk about why this particular kind of silence is so specifically dangerous for SaaS companies, more so than a lot of other types of businesses, because I think there's something unique about the SaaS model that makes this risk even sharper. A SaaS company's entire value proposition is built around centralizing data. That's the whole point of the product. Instead of every customer managing their own scattered files and systems, they hand that responsibility over to a single company that promises to handle it all in one place, securely, conveniently, at scale. Which means when a SaaS company gets breached, it's rarely just their own data at risk. It's the aggregated data of every single customer who trusted them with that responsibility. One quiet, unnoticed breach at a mid-sized SaaS company can expose sensitive information belonging to thousands, sometimes millions, of completely unrelated individuals and businesses, none of whom had any direct role in choosing how well that SaaS company secured its systems. That's an enormous amount of blast radius sitting behind a single point of failure, and it's exactly why these companies have become such attractive targets. Why would an attacker spend enormous effort trying to breach 1,000? Anything, because the entire nature of this kind of intrusion is designed to look exactly like nothing is happening. This is the part I think people fundamentally misunderstand about modern breaches. We've been culturally trained by decades of movies and TV shows to think of hacking as a loud, visible, dramatic event. Red warning screens, blaring alarms, a hacker triumphantly typing while a company scrambles in real time. That imagery is almost the opposite of how most real breaches actually unfold. The successful ones are quiet. The successful ones are patient. The successful ones look, from the inside, exactly like an ordinary Tuesday. So how does a company eventually find out if their own systems aren't screaming at them that something's wrong? This is honestly one of the most uncomfortable truths in this entire conversation. In a huge number of cases, companies don't discover the breach through their own internal security tools at all. They find out from someone else. A security researcher stumbles across a sample of stolen data being posted somewhere online, late at night, completely by accident, and has to reach out to the company directly to ask, essentially, hey, is this real? A journalist gets a tip. A customer notices something strange with their own account and starts asking questions that eventually work their way up to someone who realizes there's a much bigger problem than one confused customer. Sit with that for a second, because I think it's genuinely one of the most humbling facts about the current state of cybersecurity. Companies spending real money on security infrastructure are, in a meaningful percentage of cases, finding out they've been breached from an outsider who happened to notice something before the company's own systems did. That's not a failure of any one specific company being careless. That's a structural reality of how attackers operate now, deliberately built to slip beneath the threshold of what most monitoring systems are. With accepting a mindset shift that a lot of companies resist because it's uncomfortable. You have to stop assuming that authenticated activity automatically means legitimate activity. You have to build systems, and more importantly, build a culture that treats unusual patterns of authenticated behavior as worth investigating, even when nothing about the login itself looks technically wrong. That means investing in behavioral monitoring, not just access control. It means asking not just, does this person have permission to see this, but does the way they're accessing this look like how a normal, legitimate user actually behaves? It also means shortening the feedback loop between something unusual happening and a human actually looking at it. A lot of companies do technically have logs of everything that happens inside their systems. The problem isn't always a lack of data. It's that nobody's reviewing that data in a timely way, or the volume of data is so overwhelming that genuine warning signs get buried under an avalanche of routine, harmless activity that looks statistically similar on the surface. And honestly, it also means being willing to invest real money in this before a breach happens, not after. This is maybe the hardest part, because security spending done well is invisible. If it works, nothing happens. There's no dramatic before and after story to point to internally, no obvious return on investment you can show in a quarterly report. It's incredibly easy for security investment to keep getting deprioritized in favor of things with more visible, more immediate payoff, right up until the moment a company finds out, the hard way, exactly what that deprioritization actually cost them. I think the uncomfortable truth underneath this entire conversation is that we didn't even know we were hacked isn't really a story about bad luck. It's a story about priorities, made months or even years before the breach itself ever happened. Decisions about companies every time one of these silent breaches comes to light. It's easy, and honestly kind of satisfying, to look at a headline about a company that didn't notice a breach for weeks and think, how could they possibly be that careless? But I think that reaction misses the structural reality of the problem. This isn't one company being uniquely negligent. This is close to the default outcome of how the current SaaS security landscape is built, industry-wide, unless a company makes a very deliberate, very expensive, very unglamorous investment specifically to change that default. I also think there's something worth saying about the emotional experience inside a company during that gap, the period after the breach has happened, but before anyone knows. Because from the outside, once a story breaks, it's easy to imagine the company as some faceless, guilty entity. But inside that building, during that exact window, there are real people showing up to work every day, genuinely believing everything is fine, making completely reasonable decisions based on the information available to them, with absolutely no way of knowing that decision-making is happening on top of a foundation that's already been quietly compromised. That's not an excuse, it's context. And I think context matters here, because the actual lesson isn't companies are careless and deserve blame. The actual lesson is closer to the entire model of trust-based access that SaaS companies rely on has a structural blind spot. And until more companies invest seriously in closing that blind spot, this exact story is going to keep repeating itself, over and over, at company after company, across every industry that relies on SaaS tools, which at this point is basically every industry that exists. So what does actually closing that gap look like? In practical terms, if you're someone building or running a SaaS company right now, genuinely trying to avoid becoming the next version of this story, it starts where to spend time and money and attention, decisions that felt completely reasonable in the moment, that quietly built the exact blind spot an attacker would eventually walk straight through. The scariest sentence in cybersecurity honestly isn't, "we got hacked." It's, "we don't actually know how long this has been happening." Because that sentence isn't just admitting a security failure, it's admitting a much deeper uncertainty, that for some unknown stretch of time, a company genuinely had no idea what was actually happening inside its own walls. If this changed how you think about the SaaS tools you use or build every single day, subscribe, because we're going to keep pulling these stories apart, and I don't think this is a pattern that's going away anytime soon.